Okay, let's get started. Let's get it quiet in the back. So the first thing we're going to start talking about today is the internet, intranets, and extranets. Okay. We started talking about the internet last week and we talked about networking. Okay? So the internet is a worldwide collection of computers and networks. Okay. We all form the internet. It is not this mysterious person or entity called the internet. Okay, it's not like it's a collective communication mechanism for all of us to use. Okay, um, I'm going to tell you a really funny story real quick. Okay, years ago when I was probably some of your age, some of you are fresh out of high school, I'd imagine. Okay, not everybody, but some. When I was fresh out of high school, I worked for this early internet provider. We used modems to connect with dial-up through our phone line. And at the time, I lived in a rural area. America Online existed, but they didn't have any phone lines in their area, so it was a long-distance call. Back in those days, if you called anyone outside of your local prefix, it was expensive. Today, you can call anywhere in the world for free, pretty much. Okay, it doesn't matter anymore. But in those days, you had to spend a lot of money. So my buddy came with this idea to start a business providing internet service. He saw a need. And we didn't have a lot of capital to spend a lot of money, so we ended up with a lot more customers than we had phone lines. And so what we used to do, I'm not proud of it, but I would want to get on the internet and I wasn't working, but my buddy was working. So he would disconnect a paying customer so I could real quickly dial in and get on the internet, okay? Well, it worked fine until one guy got really upset. And he basically threatened to call the board of the internet, okay? He thought that there was such a thing because people in those days didn't really understand what the internet was, okay? He thought that it was controlled by the government. It's not, okay? It used to be controlled by the government because it was formed as a way during the Cold War to ensure that we could communicate even if, nuclear weapons were launched at one another, okay, during the Cold War, okay? But it's not controlled by a single entity. It has been controlled by a single entity in a long time, okay? Now, that being said, every country connects to the internet in a different way. So some countries do block the internet or censor it, okay? You can use your imagination, Google it later, I won't say, okay? You can use your imagination. But there are a lot of companies that do censor the internet, countries. There are different ways to connect to the internet. So all of us here on the campus, we connect to a network here, and the computers here and the networks here connect to the rest of the internet through what's called fiber optic cable, okay? And Riverside happens to sit in a great spot for that. There's been a huge investment along the major interstate corridors on the West Coast and the East Coast, as well as a couple of the interstate corridors crossing the country, which means anybody close to that has the opportunity to get really fast internet because fiber optic is, the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound or the speed of electricity, going across the wire, okay? So we're able to get really fast internet. And UCR happens to sit on multiple types of fiber optics, okay? The 215 here as well as the 15 connect all of the different UCs together, the CSUs together, and pretty much any academic institution that's public. Okay? In addition, there's the normal fiber optic backbone that the rest of the world uses. And so when you're at home and you get on your cable modem, it's actually connecting ultimately through fiber optics to the internet, okay? Some homes have fiber to their house. That was something Verizon rolled out about 15, 16 years ago here in California, as well as the East Coast. Frontier bought Verizon. So anybody here have Frontier as your provider? Okay, I do. We have fiber optic actually up to our house, which means we have the capability for extremely fast internet. Now, Frontier doesn't have the money to invest in that, so we're limited to their specific equipment. They can't go any faster in certain areas. I'm tapped out at where I'm at right now. I think 500 megabit, which is half a gigabit, and that's really fast, okay? That's on par with what you would see at a large business in there for the internet for all other company, right? Now the history, it started as a DoD project called ARPANET, okay? Like I said, Cold War, and ARPA stands for the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. Okay? And it was originally designed for use by researchers during the Cold War and government agencies and the DoD and things like that. Over time, more and more educational entities got on the internet, connected together, developed new technologies. Berkeley being, our sister school, Berkeley, being one of the organizations that developed core technologies to allow the internet to really become what it is today. Right? For the longest time, Berkeley Unix was the operating system for a lot of the servers on the internet. Berkeley actually made their own version of Unix, which is an operating system like Windows or Linux or Mac, okay? Now, in the 80s, the National Science Foundation took it over. DoD said, well, this is great. We want to fund other things, okay, like bombs and missiles and stuff like that, okay? So the NSF took it over, and they opened up to more educational use and expanded it. That was in 1987, okay? In 1989, the World Wide Web was invented on the internet. The World Wide Web is one of many different mechanisms to access things on the internet. Email's one, World Wide Web, and then there's some other ones that we don't use as often anymore, or don't use at all. So network news, Usenet. Okay, anybody heard of Usenet before? It was an old way to kind of do like discussions and things like that, okay? Another one would be Gopher. Gopher is the predecessor to the World Wide Web. Gopher was a way to fetch information, hence the name, but it was a rudimentary interface to access information. It wasn't like we have today with splashy websites and stuff like that, okay? And you had to use a special Gopher client to access things. When the World Wide Web was invented, that's about the time that we started seeing more information become available. It started off with academic institutions, but pretty soon larger companies saw the benefit and started building their own little web pages and whatnot, okay? Now, another thing that happened was commercialization, which is really what I'm gonna focus on today, is the commercialization of the internet. So around 1992, HTML started becoming popular. I learned it, okay? I'm gonna give my age indirectly here. In the early 90s, mid 90s, I learned this in high school, okay? There you go, all right? So now you know how old I am. I'm old, okay? I admit it. We learned HTML in those days, okay? And we would write our own web pages, okay? And we would start browsing the web through dial-up connections. But my school actually had a very, well, by today's standards, very low speed connection, but by those standards, a very high speed connection to the internet through NSFNet, okay? And so you could do basic searches. There wasn't a whole lot on there. Yahoo didn't exist yet. Yahoo was launched the year before I graduated, okay? Google was not even a twinkle in Larry Page and Sergey Brin's eyes yet, okay? And Bing certainly didn't exist. Bing, what's that, right? It was in its infancy stages in the early 90s. Okay? Around the mid 90s, a couple of guys were at an airport. Okay, and this is a story you won't see in the book, but I think it's important because it hits close to here. Okay? It happened close to here where this developed. The reason why we can buy things online, no matter what Elon Musk tells you, no matter what PayPal story is, okay, the reason why we can buy things online is because of pioneering companies like First Virtual, which existed in San Diego as early as '94, okay? In '96, they went public, one of the first companies to go public. And then they ended up shutting down their payment system in 1998 because they couldn't compete with the credit card companies who had by that point developed the encryption we use today to do credit cards online. Before that point, you could not buy things with a credit card online. It wasn't safe. If I did it online, you would all see my credit card number going over the internet. There was no such thing as encryption at that point, on the internet at least, okay? So we use things called virtual pins, which First Virtual developed. I would go on to a phone call, I'd make a phone call to a number, I'd enter my PIN, and then I would enter my credit card number on the phone. It would store it in a secure database. And then I would go online, I would use my PIN to purchase things. When I made a purchase, every purchase, I would get an email, and I would either respond yes, no, or fraud. And if I said fraud, it closed my account immediately. If I said no, it didn't approve the transaction. We didn't have this immediate gratification of real-time transactions at the time, okay? Now, in those days, the only places you could buy things were, and some of you might laugh at this, you could buy information. Information being purchased was a new thing, so someone could sell a joke of the day. That's how First Virtual started, actually. Two guys in the airport, a geek and a businessman, run into each other in the airport waiting for a flight. And the geek was on his laptop. In those days, big honking thing, you couldn't miss it, okay? And this guy said, hey, what are you doing? This businessman. And the geek goes, hey, I'm on this thing called the internet. And they start talking about it, and the business guy goes, yeah, you could make a lot of money selling a joke a day for a penny, okay? And that's how the idea started. But there was no way to do it at that time. So that's why they founded this company. It's in Southern California is where it was based, okay? And their properties were eventually bought by, the payment system was bought by PayPal. PayPal then changes history to say that they invented payments. They did not, okay? They bought the patent from this company. And Google acquired some other technology they did for the thing that we hate the most, spamming people, okay? That was actually something they invented as well. Okay? Ads on your website that did interactive things, emails that had interactive content, none of that existed at that point. They invented it. Google now owns it, okay? So when you do Google AdSense and stuff, that's like the great grandchild of First Virtual, okay? So those are the early days. We didn't have Yahoo or anything until the mid to late 90s, okay? Now, subsequent to that, we went through a couple of phases. We went through the early 2000s and late 90s where commerce just took off. If you had .com in your name of your company, you could get millions of dollars in money to fund the stupidest of ideas, okay? Pets.com, a huge failure. Webvan.com, let's go out and spend billions of dollars on warehouses and vans and totes so we can deliver groceries to you at an inflated price, okay? But we've got to go spend the money on this infrastructure. No one thought about, gosh, what if I just use the existing grocery stores distribution network, okay? It was whoever could get the ideas out quickly got the money. So a lot of companies never had a plan to make any money, okay? Eventually, a number of things happened. Number one, some of these companies started failing very publicly. Number two, we had September 11th happened. That also killed the economy, and those two things plus a recession killed off the remaining .coms that weren't making any money, okay? We went through a few years of lean times in the field, and then we started seeing the internet become a little bit more popular. Facebook launched, LinkedIn launched, some other companies launched, obviously, and they started actually figuring out a way to make money, or at least grow their product substantially with social networking. So we started growing the business, okay? And now we're to the point today where we've got e-commerce, and we all use it every single day, probably in some fashion, and that's kind of the history of where that came from, okay? So prior to the World Wide Web, I mentioned these different things, telnets and other file transfer. When we wanted to access and download, say, a movie file or a music file in those days, you couldn't actually get it from your web browser. There was no way to play video in your web browser. There was no way to really download video, okay? You actually had to go and use a separate piece of software called an FTP client. Log into a server, go through directories and directories and directories of information to find what you wanted, and then you could drag it to your computer on a dial-up, wait 2 days, and then 2 days later you could watch the video, okay? Netflix actually got its start in the late 90s selling DVDs over the internet. Or sorry, yeah, selling and then renting later DVDs. Okay. So www, when we see it, it's World Wide Web. Now when you see www.google.com in the name, that's a holdover from the old days. It's not required. If you just go to google.com, generally speaking, you're going to go to the same place, okay? So you don't need the www most times, okay? In those days, in the early days, www was the company's website. ftp.google.com would be their FTP site. News.google.com would be their news site, etc. Okay. Nowadays, we generally go to the web, so we just go to google.com. The second thing is graphical interfaces. The World Wide Web is where we really started seeing a graphical way where we could point our mouse and click it to get on the internet. We also saw a lot of barriers to entry dropped. So back when I first got on the internet, I didn't just take my Mac out of the box, plug it in, connect to Wi-Fi. There was no such thing as Wi-Fi. There was no such thing as cellular data. The only way to connect my laptop to the internet was physically connecting it to a phone line, or if I was lucky enough to be on a network, I could plug it into the wall. But on a phone line even, it was not simple. So when I was in college, we had basic internet in my college, okay? We had email. I guarantee you the way that you access email here is so much easier than I had to go on a mainframe, okay? I had to use the command line. So someone came up earlier and said they did the command line lab, okay? I had to use that type of interface. We have it so much better now. We've made a lot of improvements. They've been a lot of incremental improvements as well as a lot of very large improvements. Web browsers have developed from the technology. If you look at the hypothetical and you click on that link in the Internet Archive of the Toys R Us website from 20 some years ago, and you look at websites today, they are completely different. And that's actually towards the later part because Internet Archive started a little late. The internet had already been around for a few, the World Wide Web had been around for several years before the Internet Archive started to actually archive content. So if you could go even further back than that actually goes, you'd see even more rudimentary with no graphics on a website. And believe this, purple was the color of websites for some reason. Everything was purple. Okay? I don't like the color purple. I don't know about you. Purple and gray were the colors of web browsers and websites generally. Okay, that's what they all look like, and they were just textual links in the beginning. Okay, this was called hypermedia and hypertext. Okay, which leads to HTML, which stands for hypertext markup language. It's just a language used for formatting web pages. We still use HTML today. The difference is today we don't write it by hand. We use software, we go in and we click on something, say in WordPress, and we say H1, okay? When we do that, WordPress knows what to do to write the HTML. So if we went into the page and we looked at the source of the page, we'd see all the HTML stuff, okay? So if we want to learn HTML and we don't know it, we can go look at all of our web pages, go in your browser and do view source, and you can see the HTML. And you can say, gosh, thank goodness I live in today when I don't have to write that by hand anymore, okay? All right, so then the domain name system, or DNS. I showed you a little bit about this last time when we were doing the network utilities. DNS is basically the phone book for the internet, is the best analogy that I can think of for the internet's DNS. When I want to go to google.com, I go to google.com. I don't go to 172.217.9.164. I won't remember that, okay? Just like I don't remember people's phone numbers anymore, right? We use these things called uniform resource locators, or we call them URLs, okay, URLs. That's basically just a web page address. That's a URL, right? Microsoft.com is a URL. UCR.edu is a URL as well, okay? Now, DNS names, there's several different types. So we're probably all familiar with .com, right? Has anybody here never heard of .com before? Okay. I'm gonna ask you what rock you've been hiding underneath, okay? That's been the most popular since the beginning. In fact, in the beginning, people will buy up domain names, hold them, never use them, and just sell them to the highest bidder when, say, I think there was a famous example, I'm trying to remember which company it was, like American Airlines, I think, and some other ones. They didn't have the domain name that they have today. Other people had it. And then some of those companies ended up buying those domain names for millions of dollars from a squatter who had purchased up a bunch in the beginning, okay? It used to be a very lucrative business. I can tell you right now, it's no longer a lucrative business. So if you're thinking, gosh, I got the next business idea, I'm gonna do that, it's probably not gonna be helpful to you, okay? But if you truly believe that, I've got some domain names that I don't want anymore that I would love to sell you for a lot of money, okay? So the generic top level ones that have existed for a long time are .com, .net, .edu, and .gov. There were some other ones, .org and some other ones, but those are the most commons, okay? Newer versions, .cloud, our website for the class is on .cloud, okay? There's .biz, .news, there's a whole bunch of them, okay? There are even specialized domains that I will not repeat here, but you can use your imagination, right? Now, that's a generic top level domain. They're very generic. We also have country code top level domains. So .us for the United States, .uk for the UK, .au. Back in the beginning when .com was taken off, US companies a lot of times, because we were one of the first to commercialize the internet, a lot of times you would find a UK company would do like amazon.co.uk, okay? Amazon's probably a really lousy example, but barclaysbank.co.uk, because they probably were too late to get the .com domain initially. Okay? Then when they expanded in the US, they probably bought the domain name they have today. So every country has its own top level domain. Some countries have, I don't remember what country it is, but AI is big right now, artificial intelligence. There's a country with an AI domain. I know I've got a couple of them, okay? And they're hot for AI companies to purchase these domains. So this country is actually selling these domains for a lot of money because they're an area that their country code happens to match a technology of the day. Okay? But there's no like formal AI domain. It's actually a country domain. Now, internet connections. I mentioned fiber optic before. Some of you have cable, some of you have DSL. Your internet connection, you might connect to it wirelessly, but generally speaking, most people's internet is not through a wireless connection unless you're on your cell phone and doing cellular. Okay, okay, tools and search engines. So browsers. Today we have Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Edge, Internet Explorer. I forgot to put Opera up there. There are a few others probably. Okay, those are the major ones. Back when the internet first started, it was Mosaic was the first graphical browser from the University of Illinois, I believe. Okay. Then the guys who came up with that founded Netscape. Netscape was the big browser. Then Microsoft came along and made Internet Explorer, put it with Windows, and overnight, Netscape's market share went, okay. Microsoft was then sued by the government for antitrust. Okay, and a lot of things happened there. They're not really relevant to the class, but search engines. Google is the big one now. Bing. Okay. Anybody use Bing that wants to admit it? Okay. I don't see it used a whole lot, but some people maybe use it. DuckDuckGo. Okay. That one's apparently a privacy-oriented search engine where I guess it doesn't store any of your data or something. I don't really know. Yes. Because Microsoft replaced it with Edge because it had so many fundamental like architectural flaws. It still exists on your computer even with Windows 10 because I have it on mine. It's just not what they support anymore. And the problem is sometimes Microsoft Edge just won't even start. So, like I've had problems with Microsoft Edge on the laptop I showed the Oculus on where I couldn't get it to work. And so finally in desperation, so I can actually use the computer, I end up having to go to Internet Explorer and go to the website to get the patches from Microsoft because somehow Microsoft's patch broke my computer. So, yeah. But previously, you had a lot of competition in the search engine space. You had Yahoo was originally the biggest one. Okay? One called WebCrawler, InfoSeek, Ask Jeeves. Disney had one. I think it was actually Go.com or something like that. It was a combination web search engine and a portal. Okay. I think Ask Jeeves might still be around as Ask.com, but I'm not 100% certain. You also had things like Yahoo, which were directories of information. So not just the search, they started bundling in things like stock quotes, personals, classified ads, find apartments, news stories, that sort of thing. Okay, kind of what Yahoo is today if it still exists. It must, because my old boss sent me an email from Yahoo last night. Search engines. So the way search engines work are they're these robots, software robots, and they sit there and they crawl the web looking for information. So you can put a file called a robots.txt file on your website that basically tells robots to ignore my website and not search it, okay? Now, this information is loaded into a large database, and then the search engines create database indexes. Indexes are just a way to find information. So remember we talked about databases last week, and we talked about, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, we talked about primary keys. Indexes are based on those primary keys, okay? So we use that to then create an index to make it faster to search. And then your web browser just connects to the search engine running at Google or Bing or wherever you're going, okay? Now, HTML, here's a sample of HTML. Very simple sample, okay? You've got a header. This is where you've got the top of the page, what it says in your menu bar. And then you've got the body. So we've got bold text, heading text, and a link. This is how you do a link. You're not required to know this for the exam, but it's probably interesting history, if nothing else. Okay? I don't get to show you fossils or anything like that. This is my fossil, right? My version of the fossil. And I'll be like Ross on Friends, and I love the dinosaurs of computers, okay? All right. You probably don't know who Friends are, but my daughter does. Prior to web browsers, okay, text-based interfaces, you had to remember the commands. You usually needed programming skills. Very limited support of images. And images back then would take forever to load because we were on very slow internet connections. So you use them sparingly, okay? And then video wasn't supported. You can go to archive.org, by the way, to see ancient websites of your favorite website. Okay, see what they look like back in the day when they were babies. Okay. All right. Internet services, email. So there are really three things in email that I'll talk about. One is SMTP. It's the way that you send email. It's the way you've sent email for decades. Okay. Simple mail transfer protocol. When you send email from software on your computer or your phone, generally speaking, you're using SMTP to connect, okay? When you're getting your email, though, downloading your email, if you access it through a web browser, you're just using HTTP or HTTPS, just web, you're doing it through a web browser. But if you got it on your phone, or you've got it on your computer as a separate app like Outlook or something, you're using probably POP or IMAP, okay? POP's the older version called Post Office Protocol. You log in, grab your messages, download them, you disconnect, because in those days we had dial-up connections. It was expensive to stay connected. IMAP is a little different. When we connect with the Internet Mail Access Protocol, we basically connect, and we can download our mail, but generally speaking, we're just staying connected and viewing our folder on the server itself with our mailbox. Okay. We still see discussion groups. Okay. I don't generally use discussion groups, but there still are discussions groups out there. I just saw it parodied in a TV show, 30 Rock, I think. I was watching a rerun of 30 Rock the other day. And she's on this mom's board messaging people, okay? That's where I still see a lot of people is like in mom's discussion groups for people who have kids, okay? Chat and instant messaging, we use Slack. We also could use instant messaging like Google, Yahoo, or Snapchat. And then internet relay chat's used in some businesses still. It's a way to have some advanced features that you can't have with these other ones. So we have bots in Slack. IRC has the concept of bots that can do things for you automatically. Okay? And one of the teams I used to manage had an IRC system for us to chat with each other. We were global. And you could ask if you were, it didn't matter where you were, but if you were really curious about the London train schedule, you could say, I want to go home. And it would tell you the next train going to your destination, okay, on the tube, that sort of thing. All right, and then internet telephony is us being able to make phone calls via the internet. So we call this voice over internet protocol, or VoIP. Okay. Vonage was one. Google has VoIP. A bunch of other companies offer VoIP now. Okay. But it travels over the internet as opposed to physical phone lines. A lot of the phones on the campus here are still physical phone lines to that particular office. Okay. It's very costly to switch between something you've invested in. So until it breaks, a lot of times you kind of stick with it. In your businesses, you know, when you enter your careers, probably a lot of you are going to end up with VoIP phones or no phone at all. Like the last place I worked, I was able to get rid of my VoIP. I had a VoIP phone, but I got rid of it because I was just using my cell phone anyways. It served no purpose to me. Right, so intranets are basically similar to the internet, except they're private. They're within your company only. No one else can see them. So it's still a web page, same concept as any other web page, but it's used internally. So let's say I work for a big company and we store all of our procedures and processes on a website that only we can access from within our network. That's an intranet, okay? Sometimes we call them portals. An extranet, on the other hand, allows us to connect between business partners. So we have an intranet, our business partner has an intranet. There are certain things we want to share, so we use a site that we can both access, but the general public cannot access, okay? So some examples of extranets are if we've got an electronic funds transfer network between our businesses for payments, okay? If we're sharing data, we might use this thing called EDI, or electronic data integration, to send, say, and here's an example. Worked for a company and we did financials with our partners where we would collect the money and then we would have to distribute it based on certain criteria to different business partners. Okay, well, someone bought a refrigerator, the cost of the refrigerator goes to Sears, but the cost of the service goes to this particular technician who did it. And then this utility company, they've referred the customer, so they get a portion of the revenue. We used EDI to connect to Wells Fargo, our bank, so we could send a file to Wells Fargo every night that had every single transaction for the day, and whose bank account everything went to, okay? When companies run payroll, they use something like EDI, okay, to do payroll so that you get the money in your account. It doesn't go to someone else's account. Another thing is emails are kind of a primitive form of an extra. We can share information over email. And then supply chain management's another one, okay? So companies like Walmart require electronic systems to do any type of business. If you want to do business with Walmart, you not only have to accept electronic payments, you have to also have electronic systems to do business with them. They won't accept paper invoices. They won't accept paper POs. Everything has to be electronic, okay? And so supply chain management's like that. You're working with a lot of different business partners. Okay. All right, so Web 2.0 and 3.0. So up to this point, I've been really talking about Web 1.0, which was the first generation. Today, with 2.0 and 3.0, we have things like blogs, okay, wikis. Anybody ever used a wiki before? I know you've all probably used blogs, okay? Wikipedia is a form of wiki. It's a public wiki. But companies generally use these for documentation because we can be much more rapid about maintaining information and the currency of the information if we use something that's collaborative, that doesn't require a lot of controls. But some businesses have to have very strict controls on the information, and so you can't make changes unless it goes through approval processes, right? That would not be a good use case for a wiki. Social networking, RSS feeds, okay? This is how we can distribute content. We can subscribe, get a feed of information to our computer instead of having to go out and look for it. Podcasting, and then Internet 2 is that fiber optic network I mentioned that academic institutions have, okay? Internet of everything. So we've got the Internet of Things, the Internet of Me, which is more of a personalized context for the information, okay? All right, so before I go on, I want to talk real quickly about something I keep getting asked about with respect to the project. So has everybody got their listening ears on? Okay. I don't want to go kindergarten, but I keep getting asked the same question. So basically, we are going to cover the material for the things that you do in the experiential learning over the next few weeks. Project plan, we will cover next week, okay? Systems design and analysis, which is the user story stuff, we're going to cover next week. We might even get to it on Thursday, okay? Those two are going to open up the ability to get those two pieces of the project done, okay? So if you're trying to plan out your work for next week, you're going to be bombarded with those two things starting to probably Thursday. It's looking like we'll get to that point. And then Tuesday of next week, we're really going to get into it, okay? That's when you'll be able to do those things. I don't expect you to know it right now, and I know some of you may not. Okay? So just make sure that you review that material. If you miss class, you need to review that material in the lectures. Otherwise, you're going to be lost, okay? So you need to do that. Now, the second question I had that's been coming up a lot is the due dates for things. The syllabus is where the due dates are. I learned when we set it up, it defaults to random dates. With the number of assignments we have, it's too complicated to go in and change iLearn for things. I just don't use the iLearn dates. It doesn't matter. iLearn is always going to let you submit it anyways. It ignores the due dates from a submission perspective. So if there's a box out there, iLearn will always let you submit it, okay? Whether we accept it or not is based on the syllabus due date. So there are no labs due yet. They're not due for a while, okay? So look at the syllabus to see when they're due. Because I had a couple people ask me, why is iLearn different? It's because iLearn is a very difficult system to use, but it's the only way for me to accept assignments for this many students, okay? It's just not feasible for me to collect papers. It would take forever, okay? Kind of like attendance did, right? So we were using iLearn, and we're not going to use their dates. We're going to use the dates in the syllabus, all right? Is that clear? All right. The other thing about the project is that the paper. So the paper is an individual assignment, as you all know. But you should be discussing with the team the business problems, thinking about those and solving them and coming up with things, because you need that for your slides anyways, okay? Your slides are going to be the same. You're going to do one set of slides for your whole group. Your video is going to be for your whole group. You're going to all work on it, but that's going to be common. The paper, though, aside from the appendix, everything else should be your own creation. And it's going to automatically get submitted to Turnitin, so you don't want to copy your friend in your group's paper. You don't want to do that because it'll get flagged as identical or very close. Right? Write your own paper. But that being said, you can verbally discuss all you want, the problems and stuff. As long as you are just verbally discussing it, it's less likely that you're going to accidentally copy what someone else is going to write. Okay, so if you don't if you write it down individually and you don't write it down as a group, you just kind of talk about it, you're probably pretty safe from accidentally copying something that someone else wrote. Okay, now the appendix, there are a few items in the appendix: the plan, the design, and the user stories. Okay, those are going to be identical for every single person in your group. Okay? They're going to be exactly the same. Why I have you attaching them to both the experiential learning and to your paper is because I want you to be able to take that submission of your paper and use it for getting a job. Okay? And without those items as an appendix, your paper isn't as useful to help you get a job. Okay? If it's all together, it looks nice and it's all formatted the same, and you end up with a portfolio that you can bring to an interview. Okay? Very important. Okay? Most of the time these days, you're not going to get just an interview. You're going to have to do some work for it. And if you can show a portfolio, then you may not have to actually do the extra work. Okay? These days, I can tell you because I've actually been headhunted lately, and out of 3 final stage interviews, all 3 required me to do an assignment. Okay? One of which saw the work that I'd done already and accepted that, so I didn't have to do it again. Saved me some time. Okay? Now, the last thing in the appendix is a narrative reflection paper. Very short, doesn't have to be long. I don't have any minimum page requirements for that. You know, general rule is usually about a page, 2 pages is all you need. And that's just talking about how it was working with your group. What did you learn? Communication styles. What did you do wrong? What would you improve on? Everybody's gonna do that individually, okay? So it should be pretty simple. Okay, there's no like special requirements other than what's already on the website. Aside from that, once we cover the material either Thursday or next week, you should be good to go on all aspects of the project and just be continuing to learn new things in the course as we talk about different information systems. Now, I did also get a question about the lab for enterprise systems. The enterprise systems lab, if you aren't able to figure that out on your own, I will be covering that. I think it's in 2 weeks now, okay? So that is one aspect. If you're running into challenges there, I'll cover it in class, and then that's the same thing you can use for that portion of the experiential learning, okay? On Thursday, the other thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you how to do a website, okay? So today I'm gonna talk about it in the next unit. When I pull up the slides, on Thursday, we're actually gonna go through, I'm gonna show you WordPress a little bit. So everybody should be able to work on the website thing after WordPress, okay? So let me pull up the next slides and then we'll get through them and get out of here early today, okay? And there aren't many slides for this unit. Okay, let's get started. E-commerce. So first of all, e-commerce is just buying and selling things through the internet, okay? Like I said, this started around 1994. It was kind of the first e-commerce, all right? Now, you should really review the material on value chains from Porter because that is probably on the exam for some of you, okay? Because it's randomized questions. So you'll probably see some Porter questions. You should really review that material. Okay. Now, e-commerce versus traditional. So click and brick is when physical retailers add an online presence. So that would be like Walmart when it added an online presence to sell things online, okay? Staples, same thing. Believe it or not, back in 1996, I worked at Staples in Solana Beach. Anybody else work at Staples that wants to admit it? Okay. I worked there and I opened the one in Oceanside, but I went and I proposed that they launch a website because I knew this stuff back then, okay? And Staples CTO laughed at me and said the internet was never going to be a thing and they were never going to have e-commerce. The best that they would have is a simple website, and it had literally some animated pencils and that you could call this number for the nearest location. It was very simple, okay? Fast forward to today, they do a lot of business on their website, okay? They were completely wrong. Now, there are different e-commerce models. There's the model of you basically have a traditional model and you shift it to the internet. Amazon took the traditional book selling model, moved it to the internet. Very successful, okay? I don't even want to think about how, I mean, as much as Amazon irritates me sometimes, I don't even want to think about what the world would be like today if we didn't have Amazon, because a lot of things we take for granted probably wouldn't exist. Okay? They've really spent a lot of money in innovating. Then there's the brokerage where you bring buyers and sellers together. That's the eBay model. Okay, they created a marketplace. People started using it and increased the size of the marketplace and just kept going. Okay. Another one is advertising. So we will provide you with free content, a la Google or Facebook, but we're going to sell ads to pay for that content. Okay, that's another model. Another one is where you mix. So Amazon's actually these days a mix of different sources. Intermediary, so you collect information and sell it to others. So BizRate, Yelp, that sort of thing. Okay. And then subscription. So we sell digital products. So Wall Street Journal, newspapers, things like that. Okay. Hulu, Netflix. Okay. Now there are different categories. So if you ever see these acronyms, this is what they mean. So B2C and B2B are the most common that you see. Okay. These were basically all the businesses that started in the early 2000s, late 1990s, fit into either B2B or B2C or both. Okay. Then over time, we started to see consumer to consumer. Okay. I can go on to Etsy and I can transact directly with someone who creates something, basically not a formal business, just another individual. Okay. I can also do consumer to business where I'm doing direct transactions that flow from me to a business. An example of that might be like freelancing sites. Okay, I can offer my services to a business as a freelancer. Okay? But in my case, I'm a business, but other people are not. Then you've got different types of government services that fit into there. So government to consumer, government to business, and then government to government. And then government to employee. So there's a lot of different types of government. E-government, by the way, is a really hot area right now. Took the government a long time, even though the US government is really what funded the internet's creation, it's taken a long time to get a lot of services available online. Okay? That's because the government tends to move very slowly. They're very risk averse. Okay? B2C, so we share information, we do ordering, we pay. There's fulfillment, so the shipping, the handling, getting it boxed up, and then the support after the transaction. That's how B2C works. Okay. B2B, we might have a seller-side marketplace. So an example of this is, I forget the name of it, but the General Services Administration for the federal government has this marketplace where all agencies and also non-federal agencies can go out and purchase things through a marketplace to procure things. Okay. I think that the UC system has something similar probably through the state of California. Okay. Another thing is a buyer side marketplace where you've got RFQs that go out. So we request that companies give us a quote. And so some larger organizations use that model to do commerce. Okay. There can be a third party exchange. So there could be, it's basically not controlled by sellers or buyers. There could be like a specific vertical industry based marketplace. Okay. Education maybe. Another one could be horizontal, okay? So accounting, marketing. There might be a marketplace for that sort of thing where you can buy things for those particular areas. Now, e-commerce technologies, electronic payments that we have today, credit cards, e-checks, PayPal, Apple Pay, Android Pay, micropayments, things like Bitcoin is another one I didn't put up here. No longer around though, these were replaced by credit cards. So virtual PINs lasted about 4 years, cyber cash, digicash, and then just to note, before 1998 or so, roughly, it wasn't safe to use credit cards online, so people didn't use them. Okay. Incidentally, actually going back to that page real quick, back in the early 2000s, I think around 1999, 2000, Amex actually came out with the clear Amex. They call it the blue card. Anybody seen that before? Okay, that still exists. It had a smart chip in it, and they actually wanted to do secure commerce, so they actually built this smart card reader that you stuck it in on your computer, and then it wouldn't actually ask you for your credit card number when you shopped online. Problem was, like many technologies, it sounds great in theory. It was probably secure. It was just really difficult to use. So people ended up getting frustrated and just entering their credit card number anyways, okay? And that was before chip cards came out here in the US. Chip cards have been around in Europe and other places for many years, okay? Web marketing, so you should review the different terms. I didn't want to copy the whole thing from the book here. So all the terms about web marketing, you might see those on the exam, okay? Mobile marketing, search engine optimization, things like keywords, page title, the types of links that you have in the content that will then optimize how you show up in the Google and Bing search results, okay? There's social commerce, so doing transactions through Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And then social media information systems. So there is one lab for this class, the Hootsuite one, which I know a few of you keep asking me about it. I resubmitted my application. I don't know what they did. They confused me with my other class somehow, and I didn't have enough accounts. They made me create another one for this class. I sent it on Friday, I think. It takes them a couple business days to process. I'm hoping to have that maybe tomorrow, and then as soon as I get it, I will post the instructions on iLearn for you of how to access your Hootsuite accounts, okay? That's it for